system on thought. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the show. Today, we are talking about Rick's beard. Rick's been working on a beard
Indeed.
for probably about 3 months now, and we're really excited about the progress that he's showing, and he's going to get there.
Wait,
But every chance you get,
I'm missing something here.
I'm
You
kidding.
gotta look really close, Jeff. Get really close,
Yeah.
and you can see.
Don't blame this on me. I would be clean shaven if it was my choice.
Rick is doing it for the health of his marriage.
Rick's
mean,
beard.
You're
Okay.
so close to being on Duck
there's-
Dynasty
there's
right now,
this
Rick.
side.
It's like
There's this side of the conversation that can have a beard. And then there's this side of the conversation that goes 3 months without shaving, and then their wife complains and they shave. So,
indeed.
See,
Approaching.
this is like 2.5 weeks for me, so it's going to be a long time before there's anything worth looking at.
See, you've got a great jawline. You just need to trim this part, square off this part, have the jawline, and then this. Great line. You just got to see where the path. That's what I do. I get off all of this right here.
Okay,
And that's what this episode's
kid.
about today, folks, is growing beard. So
Shaving,
I kid, and I can't tell how angry Rick actually is right now. So,
I'm not angry.
um,
I honestly, this bugs the hell out of me. I really much prefer being clean shaven.
once it gets longer, it stops being itchy.
yeah, this is true. It gets easier. Okay, what we're actually talking about is near future MILSF versus far future MILSF. And why don't we throw out some examples of near future and far future so we can kind of start the conversation?
Hmm.
do we want to example our work or do we want to example other people's works?
I think Rick could have some examples. I mean, Gates to Hell is probably, I guess you call that current day with far future.
Yeah,
That's a mix.
it's approaching alternative history.
Yeah.
Given who was president during it. But I would say Gates of Hell and Earth at War are pretty much near future. Also, that Sunkiller series I did for Variant, that's near future-ish.
Mhm.
Far future, the Archangel series I'm doing now is far future. It's over 1,000 years from now. As far as like classic military science fiction, I believe that Starship Troopers is supposed to be kind of far future.
Yeah, it was a
Seems like
whopping 1990s.
Is it? Was it?
Yeah,
set in
1999 is when
Really?
that takes
Oh, well,
place. Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
sorry, I take it back.
Well,
Well,
back
no,
then,
but he wrote it in
1999 was
1955.
that was like your generic future time,
You know, so
Yeah.
that was like
So we
45,
definitely were not
50
going into
years.
2000s without Armageddon.
Yeah. Buck Rogers is far future. It's
500
thousands of years in the future. Or is it hundreds of years or thousands of years? I can't remember.
like 25th century. So
25th century, yeah, that's right.
you reach a point where far future can be such a broad range of anything that
Right.
it's a little nebulous. But
I
So
kinda
let's
feel like
define
far
that. How do we
future is-
define far future?
I would define far future as anything not in your or your children's lifetime.
No, I wouldn't agree with
So
that.
because anything after 2100 would be far future because nobody alive today is going to see 2100. You
I
don't know
would
what it's
say
gonna be like.
I would probably go near future could be anywhere from like 30 to 40 to 50 years in the future to like say 200 years in the future, because a lot of times it's kind of difficult sometimes when you talk about tech, but you can visualize mentally a couple hundred years like very easily. But then you
Yeah.
start talking about anything out of that up to 1,000 years, 10,000 years, whatever.
Not
those
just
kind
tech,
of- those-
society is going to look so
Society, right? Like, so if you look at society 200 years ago from today, it is different, but it's also the similar in many ways. But when you're talking about far future, 500 years in the future, especially with technology being what it is, it could look very, very different. But 100 years from now, it's probably not going to look too much different. And
All right, I
and
see what you're saying. Yeah,
And by the way, Jeff,
Yeah,
it's
I see
not
what
true that nobody alive today is going to see 2100.
well, nobody reading a book today.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say somebody born in 2025 and only be
Yeah, my
75
son's
years
probably
old.
going to see 2100. But
Well, they keep saying that if you were born past a certain point, you could live to 120 or 150, or, depending on what breakthroughs are going to happen with, medical science. I I don't know if that's going to hit my lifetime, but that's, I think for me also it comes down to like transhumanism, and do humans, are we uploading ourselves? Have we completely
right.
changed ourselves biologically to live, where the experience of being human is so different that it's pretty hard to imagine, like you're saying. But
We're
also I
only
feel like you reach a point where science for us becomes super magical because the base of what they might understand is just magic to us.
Well, some people might say that like Star Trek is far future, but really, I mean, they were only, 2200, 2300 in terms of like proper year. So you're only talking 250 years
yeah, Star
to
Trek's
get
23rd
to,
century. So,
yeah. So I
well,
mean,
TNG's 24.
technically, yes, it could be far future. And what's interesting, bringing up that point is, do you know how like uh ridiculously fast technology would have to progress to get us to where Star
Right.
Trek was from now? Like just like leaps, like you have to like leapfrog uh inventions and technology to get to where Star Trek was, even at
according to the
their
original series timeline, we should have already had the warp drive, I think.
Mhm.
right.
Well, we
Yeah,
should already have World War III, and most of the world should have been devastated.
Yeah, but
right.
it's the thing is it's hard to imagine that while you're in it, because if you look back, the life of someone in 1900 is so, or even, 1925 is so different from today, where the advances we've had in 100 years, I think if anything, it's pretty sad that it feels like things have slowed down, but we can't see all the places potentially where it's advancing, until you can look back.
And the funny thing about trying to predict the far future is you can't really predict the societal effects of small pieces of technological innovation. Like, who would have predicted the effects of this on society? You
Right.
know,
Hmm.
Or
because it's
social
not
media.
just the being in touch. Everybody's like, oh, you're constantly in touch with somebody, or you. No, it's social media on your phone that is that has changed society completely in just 10 or 15 years.
I
Right.
want to point out, though, something we're talking about society and civilization and technology, and it's all very interesting. But people haven't changed.
Well,
They,
that's
really, they
that's why I
really,
get to
they
like
really
until we
haven't.
get to something that fundamentally changes humans.
Human
Like,
experience. I
if we
just don't.
upload ourselves, if you got people that are bioengineered to live in vacuum, if you got people bioengineered for different gravities, like I see that as the thing that would fundamentally, potentially,
That would
I
change
see.
some people,
yeah,
but like
some you're right because we
people in general,
right.
like if you go back 2,000 years and you've got era appropriate currency, right? And you can speak the language, you would understand people just fine.
Mhm.
Because people, if you look at the history as a whole and you read stories about history written by people at the time, not rose-colored glasses history or revisionist history, but like, what you're a historian, Rick. What do they call it first? The
The
source that's
primary
closest,
sources.
Oh,
primary
primary,
sources
right.
at the time. Like I remember reading this letter from this captain of a Roman ship, who had went to investigate what happened at the volcano, and like he described what happened to his men and how bad he felt about it. Like that could have been any time, any time period.
When I think
People
about
don't change.
like differences in if we want to call it like genre, but timescape, like near future, far future. Um, when I had a near future mill sci-fi series that I was going to write with another guy, that was within like 40 years. And so we were taking present day technology and just extrapolating a little bit. And so like they have we've talked about this before, the exo armor stuff that they're experimenting with and that kind of stuff. We kind of took that to the next level and just, it was still primarily Earth based. I don't remember if we had any space travel or whatever, but like the Expanse, if you want to take, like, the Expanse is basically near future. Like, it's not technically
Hmm.
mill sci-fi, but a lot of the stuff that's in the Expanse
I think it's supposed to
is
be a few hundred years in the future, isn't it?
Well, it is, but that's where I think that's
well,
been
that's what I'm saying. Like the difference in
yeah.
like we're
Okay,
still
so
solar system
let's
locked.
not reference too much the expanse when it comes to where technology is going to go, because a lot of that technology is just completely
No, I'm
not
just
even not
saying
possible. It's just made up. I mean, it doesn't. It can't exist.
Right,
The
but I'm
special
not like
fuel and the spinning the planets faster for gravity, because that's not how that works. That
Spinning the
well, I don't know.
planets faster.
In
What was that
terms of
from?
in expanse, they spin the planets faster to decrease gravity.
Oh, the
That's what
aliens
I
once
thought.
Oh, the aliens do.
No, the humans do. They spin up the
in
planets
the
faster, like
Expanse.
Sirius.
The Expanse?
Yeah, they talk
I
about it
don't
all
remember
the
that
time.
part. Is that
I don't
the
remember
last
that
one?
one.
Yeah, they spun up Sirius to spin faster to increase.
Oh,
Oh,
you mean the
oh,
asteroid?
that was an
Yeah.
asteroid, not a planet.
Sirius is like 500 kilometers wide. I mean, it might as well be a planet, but I mean, like, still not how it works.
Well, what
I
I
mean,
was talking
it is
about
how it
in
works if you have people, if you've hollowed it out and
Right.
people live on the
Yeah,
interior.
that's not what they did, though.
Oh, I didn't read
Yeah,
that
no, I
part.
mean, I'm saying that's not what they did. So, I mean, to bear in mind when we're talking about technology, everything that happens in the expanse hinges on the special fuel that the guy discovered that allows ships to go faster, farther on less, and the spinning up of the planets to increase their gravity. So, when
right,
you're
what
hinging
I
your
was
universe
saying,
on technology, it's got to be technology that either can exist or might exist in the future, and that we have, like, the grounds for right now.
yeah,
Like
I
power
think
armor is a
they,
good example. Like, we're gonna
yeah,
have power armor. It's gonna happen. We're gonna have space travel at some point that is more than just what we have now. We're gonna have laser weapon, directed energy weapons in atmosphere that work at close range better than we have now, because that's where the technology is going. But
well, I think though, but when we're talking about near or far, I'm not even really considering technology at that point, because you can still have rule or cool technology, because you can have near future sci-fi with space gates that don't that those, if they're alien space gates, they don't
yeah,
really
Mass
matter.
Effect,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? So I'm just talking about in terms of like in general, it seemed like near future because like solar system locked, like a lot of the spacecraft they were using still used like motion gravity and they
Oh
didn't
yeah,
have
they're
artificial
building
gravity.
skyscrapers and
Yeah, yeah.
rockets and things like that. Yeah, no, that
Right.
was all really great. It's just the fuel and the gravity thing
For
that got.
sure. Yeah. I think regardless of whether you're far or near, you're either going to have books that are more realistic or more rule of cool.
And there's nothing.
I
Let me
think
rephrase. Let me just be clear. There's nothing wrong with rule of cool. It
sure.
just don't present something is not possible as some sort of scientific fact in your book,
Right.
because you might get people who are like they do with the Expanse, which is everybody's like, oh, it's such a great hard sci-fi, which it's not even remotely.
Yeah.
Or,
Parts
but
of it.
more
I mean,
likely, as an indie author, you're gonna get 1,000 reviews of people
Yeah.
saying this guy doesn't know anything about science, because everybody who
Or
reviews
just
books-
clearly make sure that it's made up science.
yeah,
Right.
That's
If
the
you've got
problem.
like,
Well, I think a
go
lot
ahead.
of this is another discussion, but creating rules that are somewhat based on what we know, and as long as you follow the rules, I think you could.
Yeah.
That's where you can get away with sometimes. Like hard science fiction to me follows the rules that we know and the physics as we know it in certain ways, and I think The Expanse tries to do that. I mean, this is a whole other
The
discussion.
same way that Star Trek does that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Because Star Trek really, I mean, they're not hard science fiction, but they like to
Not
say
even
like
close.
we're super science, like we're like in the science and we've got scientists working on the
yeah,
show.
technobabble. You
But
sound like you know what you're
dilithium
talking about.
crystals are not a thing. Dilithium
Right.
crystals are a made up deal, right? But there's still like set rules with the dilithium
Yeah, but
crystals and how they're
it isn't
used.
even the dilithium crystals or the warp drive isn't the problem with Star Trek science. Uh, Star Trek scientific problem is that it's inconsistent and that
Right.
well, and then
Yeah.
they can never
you
settle
trench it
on one
across different
thing.
shows and different writers.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Right.
It's as consistent as it is. And that's what happened with Discovery is they completely swapped a whole bunch of stuff. So It's
Actually, come to think about it, the Edge of Tomorrow is a good example of near future mill sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it's
Yeah,
it's within
yeah.
our lifetime pretty much. They're extrapolating technologies. They've got some things that we don't have, but you can clearly see that it's derived from something in present day. And honestly, look at aliens. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
they have like
It's still the United
spacecraft
States
and
Marine
stuff
Corps
like
there.
that. It's the United States Marine Corps. Their guns are still kinetic
I thought it was Colonial
projectile-based
Marine Corps.
weapons.
They
I'm
call them
sorry?
Colonial Marines, but they have USMC tabs on their
Yeah,
outfits and
Yeah.
stuff. So
yeah.
and American flags. So my guess is like the Colonial Marines are like NATO,
Right,
and
right.
the USMC is like there as part of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because like like we talked about at the beginning and try to come up with some examples of near future. There's not a whole bunch because sometimes near future mill sci-fi gets wrapped into like just modern day
Thriller.
sci-fi.
Yeah, or
Right?
military thriller.
It gets dropped into a thriller. Yeah, thriller. Yeah.
Um,
And so they don't like a lot of times people look at mill sci-fi and automatically they register far future, which is typically the case for the most part.
it's not
Um,
exactly mil sci-fi, but Pitch Black would be pretty.
oh
I did
yeah.
get the feeling that was super far in the future.
Well, the first one, not
The first one, the second one, I
not the
realized
one with
it was like,
yeah.
okay, this is not even our galaxy.
Right.
But but the
Or
first
like
one kind
the
of felt
Battlestar
like,
Galactica remake when we thought it was far future, but it was actually spoiler alert way in the past.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the original Battlestar too. Is that I don't know if you ever saw Battlestar 1980, but they
No.
eventually find Earth. And spoiler, alert, it's modern
Mhm.
day. So
Well, that
Oh,
was
they
the
get
thing
to
about
it. They get to Earth when it's modern day.
it's the original. In the
1980.
original Battlestar, they did. Yeah, they got to Earth, and it was.
They had
modern day.
they had a one season of a follow-up series called Galactica 1980, where they reach Earth in 1980, which doesn't make any sense
Ah.
because they saw well, they didn't see it, but a transmission reached them of the Apollo landing on the moon, and they were at least several dozen to a couple of hundred light years away from Earth at this time, and they got this transmission that they received, which would mean that Earth is about the time of Star Trek when they should have arrived.
Yeah.
So a Star
Mhm.
Trek Battlestar Galactica crossover would have been possible and
Yes.
desirable.
Gary
Yes.
Seven could have been. They could have used Gary Seven to bridge the gap. I don't know if
There
guys
you
remember
go.
the
Yep,
original
exactly.
episode of Star Trek with the guy with the time traveler.
I would have loved to have seen Kirk and them up against the Cylons. That would have been awesome.
That would have been sweet.
I mean, they went up against the Borg, right?
Yeah, we were talking about
Oh,
fan
Kirk
fiction
never went up
earlier.
against the
That would
board.
make a hell of a fan fiction.
Yeah.
Kirk never went up against the board.
No, that's true.
It's because he
Kirk
would
would
have
have
won.
Kirk
It's
would have
feeling
kicked
like-
the board's butts. He would
Yeah.
have taken care of this fast.
So near future feels more like a concept of like we've talked about. You have to do things in a way that people are going to understand. And oftentimes that does lean on the military as we know it, or military tropes, or like organization and the way weapons are used and things like that. So it kind of feels like near future is going to be very much like that. Like almost there could be examples that are potentially in other like it's hard to say exactly what
Near
time
future
frame.
sci-fi is also Stargate. The Stargate.
Yeah,
series.
exactly. But then
There's a
far
ton of
future,
advantages to near future too over far future.
Yeah.
Like, you don't
Yeah,
have to
you
look
can
up
use
much stuff.
you can use current
Right.
day references,
Yep.
current day fashions. You don't you can draw people who are or current readers. People reading now live in this world. So if you can do things that engage them, and make it familiar for them, it's easier for them to get involved in the story.
Mhm.
I was just thinking that it's funny because I mentioned it several times before, but the Commonwealth saga by Peter Hamilton, there's like 7, 8 books in that universe.
That's a good run.
Technically, that's near future. But because they have such exponential jumps in technology development, when you get to the later trilogy, it feels like it because the first book takes place almost in the 2000s in terms of like where it's happening at, and really the jump is just that they discovered wormholes and how to make them, and that's how they connected all the worlds. And then I think the next trilogy takes place like 500 years after that. So it's the way you present the technology could could
Well,
make it.
plus he has a vastly expanded lifetime. So even
Yeah.
though it's hundreds of years in the future, you have people born in the 21st century who are still main characters, which I think is not. I was going to get to the con of near future sci-fi as opposed to the pro is to get the kind of technology that you need to have interstellar wars, something drastic has to happen. I mean, if you're going to get some kind of star travel within the next 50 years, it's going to have to be the aliens come to us and give us star travel, or we discover the stargates or something like that. Something drastic has to happen. Or in the case of Peter Hamilton, some little scientist in his garage discovers how to make wormholes.
Right.
There was Heinlein wrote a book called Friday, which is military sci-fi, but is enjoyable for a lot of aspects, but it's somewhat dated, and he was a dirty old man when he wrote it, so there's that aspect to it. But in the book series, somebody discovered how to make basically something called a shipstone, which was unlimited energy in something the size of a Duracell battery using household chemicals. And they never patented it or copyrighted it or anything because they didn't want anybody to know how to do it. And so they made this huge empire with unlimited energy. And you would think that that would make society wonderful, but it actually ended up destroying society because once energy was unlimited, it just sort of broke down. Society just sort of broke down. But there is also the possibility of like a singularity moment where somebody discovers something that is truly groundbreaking and changes the world for the way it comes. Halo is a great example too of far future, but feels like near future. It's set in the 26th century. It's like 25 something. But with their technology and everything, it kind of feels like, you know, they submarines and they still use, you know, they're UN Marines, but they still use kinetic weapons and for the most part, but they have space travel and they have pretty relatable technology.
The original,
What
if anybody played Marathon, which is the story that Halo came out of that Bungie made, it's 23rd century, and that's when the Space Marine is, or the Master Chief is part of that. The character is supposedly like an outgrowth of that, but there's like a really direct timeline. Bungie had this whole previous timeline with another game called Pathways into Darkness that takes place in Mayan temples that led to Marathon, the 3 Marathon games, and then Halo after that, and Halo expanded from there. So there's like a whole timeline for Halo that a lot of doesn't always get talked about. But I digress.
You know, one of the things I really like about near future is the being able to identify so easily, like what Rick was saying. If you know what a you know what a forklift is, so you can visualize if somebody's like in Tranquility. Tranquility is basically near future mil sci-fi because I use construction mechs, which are we call rigs, but it's basically just a walking forklift, right? And you can identify that, and they have projectile guns, and their technology is not super advanced where you've got a high learning curve to figure out what's going on. In weaponized, contrastly, like it's far future, and there's a lot of improved technologies, and a lot of the things that I do in that book, I try to speak the way that they would speak because of the technology, and that makes the learning curve a little higher. But it's also, a lot more interesting in terms of like figuring. One of those things I like about far future is that you get to kind of experience and actually live in a new place, somewhere that's not familiar, that it's close enough to what you understand in terms of just civilization, but you get to like live in a world that is not anything like our own, and that's interesting a lot of times too.
I think one of the getting to the far future, the pros and cons of that. Obviously, the pros are that you can just throw in all the scientific advances you want and not have to explain how the heck did this happen,
Right.
How do we have hyperdrive, 100 years from now, well, this is 1,000 years from now, somebody discovered
Right.
it.
Right.
The con to far future, as we were talking about, is the difference in society and the difficulty that a current day reader is going to have identifying with these people. And I found that the way you almost have to try to get around that is to have somebody who's kind of from the sticks of this civilization, somebody who's out in the boonies, who doesn't live in
The everyman.
yeah,
Right.
well, somebody who doesn't live in
Into it.
like the core of the civilization where they have all this really advanced technology. They're out in the sticks, living more of a life like somebody currently would live, and looking at all this from the outside to give the reader an outside view of everything. Because otherwise, it's really hard. I mean, I've read, and this is the problem, in my opinion, that a lot of 1970s science fiction had too, is that you read these books that take place in the far future in societies that are totally different, and the author is doing their best to make this a believable society. But I had very, very hard difficulty identifying with any of these characters because they're living in such a different society and accepting things that I don't accept and not seeing why they're strange. And the author is just counting on you to understand what the differences are and see that these people are looking at things differently, which I guess is okay, but it's not engaging. It's work to have characters who have different ideas they accept as normal, and you have to kind of work your way into their heads every time you open the book.
Well, the author has to demonstrate that, and maybe they are trying to make some kind of metaphor about what a future could be like. But if you're spending the whole time thinking why an anarchist society won't work, or why this authoritarian society, like how did this develop, or things of that nature, you're right. It makes it hard to invest in the character because you're fighting with the idea.
Yeah.
Um,
You can't identify with the character who lives in a society that's totally unidentifiable. So that's why I think it's important to have, Heinlein did it a couple of times, like Citizen of the Galaxy. Remember that one?
Mhm.
Or Farmer in the Sky. You would bring somebody from outside this, or for better example, Between Planets. The kid from Between Planets, he lives on Earth, but he's from he spent his childhood in Venus, which is like a backwater on Venus, and he sees all this stuff like in New Chicago. When he goes to visit his uncle, it's all this stuff is strange to him as it is to us, which helps you to like get a foothold in the future.
One of the things I don't like about like some of the far future stuff is the tendency to make one civilization monolithic, and
right.
like
One
everybody thinks
society.
the same, and everybody does, they all do the same thing, or they all
Well,
believe the same
that was
way.
like a 70s and 80s thing, and up to the 90s really
Sure.
too. Is they just assume because the more that things expanded, the more like the McDonald's in every country in the world type of deal. Yeah, they just assume that our culture would get what's the word I'm looking for? Homogenous,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
all
Right.
around the planet.
So you got to remember something that was really popular, started a scientific idea that was really popular starting in the 50s and went through the 90s. And I think at this point it's been pretty thoroughly debunked, was the nature versus nurture. They thought there was no nature, that it was all nurture, that everybody's programmed to behave the way they are, the way they behave by society. And there's
Tabula rasa.
no, huh?
Tabula rasa.
Yeah, and that there's
Thanks,
no
Blake.
nurture, that you could just raise somebody to believe something, and nothing that they're born with would have any impact on that. And I think the way society behaves, the way biology is pretty much debunked that at this point.
Well, it's one of the big tensions it's fun to work with that tension, like, because society is always going to try and, other people are going to try and put their ways of living on other people, and other people might have reasons that they push against that, which,
Well, I mean, with the crazy ideas like, in Star Trek, where they'd land on a planet, everybody was running around, and it was a free love planet, and there was no
yeah.
crime,
Well, that's also
blah,
that
blah, blah,
that single, it's like a single biosphere as well. Like I think people just, I mean, it's hard to come up with. If you have a trillion humans, like that's so many different cultures that could, come into play and exist, and that's hard to even think about, But
I think one of
that's
the cool things that Peter Hamilton did with a lot of his stuff is not only did he uh, fully kind of realize and encapsulate like native human culture that we understand, but he created other ones as well. And a lot of times, like he had like the posthumanists who had adopted just digital living, and then he had people who were doing other things like biologically or whatever.
Were the ones in
Um,
the Night's Dawn trilogy that like uploaded their consciousness to a computer when they died?
The I don't know if that I don't I think that was in Night's Dawn, but that was in the Commonwealth universe where
Well, in the Night's Dawn trilogy, they have one because that was a way to get around your consciousness going into that version of the
yeah,
afterlife, made you get reborn and you know
right.
get tortured
He
by
might have
this.
had two different versions of that because in the Commonwealth one they had like a central uh I'll call it a core, but I don't know if that's the right term, but they had a central place where all of those people kind of got uploaded and stored to
Yeah, they had that in Night's
and
Dawn
lived in.
trilogy too.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm trying to do, like you're mentioning, not being able to identify with character or society in a far future setting. One of the things I'm trying to do with Weaponized is have the most of the main characters each have a different understanding of the universe itself. And so one guy has kind of a basic understanding. So he's kind of your everyday guy. And then another guy has a more political, spy, intelligent based understanding of what's going on. And then the other character, the hacker, has a lot of knowledge on the digital space and the digital technology. And so we don't have to you're not struggling to identify with a character who should understand this whatever it is but doesn't, and then you don't have to get overloaded with all these different concepts in one chunk of material, right? Like you're having the a tactical understanding of things over here, so you don't need all of the other stuff, or you have a digital technical outlook on things over here, and it kind of spreads it out a little bit. A lot of writers do it really well, where they're, um, at least in modern works that I've read, where they're kind of spreading out the uh, the meal, so you're not just eating all five courses at once, and you're not trying to just ingest all of the information because
Mhm.
in a far future, a lot of the earlier works in far future, you'd have two or three chapters of just info dump. The humans traveled from here to here, and then they did this, and they did, all that stuff doesn't matter to your story per se. It might be cool world building, but you kind of piecemeal that out a little bit and spread the dump, as it were, across different chapters or even different POVs. It makes that ingestion of the information a little easier to deal with and a little bit more reasonable too, because not everybody is going to know everything about everything, right? And that's one of the things I really don't like about some books is your main character knows everything about everything. And so, you know, you go to a planet and he knows everything about the planet, right? And then you go to another planet, he knows everything about the planet. Well, that's a lot of information because I don't know everything about Earth. And so
Right.
knowing
You don't know
everything
everything about
about
Earth, Josh? Josh?
no, I don't. I barely know Wichita, Kansas, bro. Like,
Well, one of the
like,
tendencies in far future, even I think, because people get really excited about the world they've invented, is they
yeah,
want to do exactly what you're talking about and like lay out all of that RPG world building. But then also
right.
the
But if you're
stakes
in
are
the far
always
future and you have an implanted computer with files, you can know everything about that
you
planet.
could.
That's true.
What does it
That's
mean?
By the
true.
way, by
But
the way, that society I was talking about is called the Edenists.
hmm.
Yes. Okay.
But where I was going with that is they often make the stakes, it's always often like the stakes are really high. And one of the
Mm.
things I kind of like in a far future story is like if it really drills into that like that stuff is kind of in the background and you get the smaller story with the smaller stakes about a person trying to live in this new future. And one thing I wanted to touch on before we leave it is like how do we see we've kind of talked about this before, but combat playing out in far future? Because it feels like you could have far like I think one of the assumptions we have about far future is that, if it is in a like Jeff was just saying, a post-scarcity society, why does anybody need to fight? But far future, I think one of the tropes I like is far future where technology has declined. And so maybe you have a base of technology, like we have spaceships, but we still have to use toothbrushes, or whatever, like things
Right.
of, and so I think that's always something to consider with far future. But I also love when I read about some different kind of combat that I never thought of, like a directed radiation weapon from a star or something, or using like coming up with different weapon types that could only exist in that time frame is always pretty cool as well. But is
Except
there
when
any,
you wind up with things like sometimes people go too far and
yeah,
they create these weapons that they're very plausible for a far future society, but they remove the stakes, like the personal stakes of a military science fiction story.
hmm
Like if you're using directed black holes that can destroy planets, and everybody has this, it's like this doesn't leave a lot of room for the personal individual
right.
stakes of a story. Oh, they destroyed my planet. I'm going to go destroy theirs. It's
Well, it's like why don't we have a lot of even modern day stories about nuclear war? Because nuclear war isn't interesting. Like
Well,
you launch a couple of nukes and it's done. Like that's it. Like,
also, I mean, you're missing the human element here too, because like, why is there any conflict? We have nuclear weapons. Why is there any
Mhm.
conflict? Well,
Right.
because we're not going to use them. So
Right.
it's like I watched this video about planetary invasions recently, and they were talking about how there wouldn't be any because you could just get into orbit and bomb them. Like, yeah, you can.
But then you'd
But
ruin
like,
the planet.
are you a
Right.
person? Are you a society that is okay with exterminating billions of people from
Well,
orbit?
even if you are, why do you want the planet? If you want the
Exactly.
planet because it's a habitable biosphere, turning it into something that's barely or uninhabitable isn't really going to solve anything for you. And there's
Right.
really that's I mean that's a big problem of military science fiction in general is why we fight, why people have interstellar wars. What are you fighting for? Because that you have to deal with that, especially in a far future. In the near future, you can get away with just kind of a societal inertia where we fought before for these reasons and we're just doing it again, whether or not it makes sense. But you get into the far future, you can get all the resources you need from asteroids and comets and space-based industry and uninhabited and uninhabitable moons and gas giants. And the and there's so many systems that even if they don't have habitable worlds, they're going to have gas giants, they're going to have asteroids. So you've got to figure out a reason they're going to fight. And if the reason is the lack of habitable planets or people want more habitable planets, then fighting in a way that makes them uninhabitable doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And also,
One
I
of
mean,
the
that presupposes that wars have always been fought over resources, and I think with few exceptions, that's just not the case.
I
Uh,
guess that would depend on what version of history you believe.
well,
Because
I
there's
mean,
like arguments about that.
there are
well, you
wars that have
have
been fought
religious
over
wars and you
resources.
have just hateful wars where people don't
Yeah.
like somebody and
Yeah,
they
And also, I
yeah.
don't
but a
think it's
lot
an
of a
either
lot
or
of a lot
thing.
of cases can be made that even in religious wars and wars of like where there's tribes that hate each other, the reason they hate each other and the reason these religions are opposed to each other is because they want the same land and they want the same
Right.
resources.
It's not black or white, I don't think. I mean, all these things play into each other, and then you're right. There's probably an inciting event that might be tied to culture in some way or something like that. But but you're right. Like that, I think a good story like pulls all those things together and isn't just black or white about it. It's not a monoculture, and it's a pretty simplistic view of war to think that, I mean, I guess you could come up with like just we have whatever royal societies, and the king decides to go attack that guy because he's an idiot. But the king probably still wants something. Um,
Can
so
weaponize the off-screen bad guys of the Federation. They're encroaching on basically what amounts to kind of a, a Wild West type area of systems that aren't really developed, almost like third world, kind of almost like a neutral zone, but not really. And they're encroaching and they're going in and kind of capturing these systems and these installations and colonies and stuff. And the purpose for that is the ruler, who's basically like it's like North Korea-ish in the type of ruler caste that he has. Like he was able to use some events and take over, but he is basically terrified that they're going to get attacked again, and so he's securing his border by capturing all of these other places. And so it doesn't have anything to do with resources or anything else other than we can't have anybody on our border that's going to threaten us. So we're going to take all of this, whatever it is, right or wrong, right? And so then it kind of eliminates
Careful, Josh.
the
That sounds awfully familiar.
yeah.
I mean, there could be there's internal,
but there's always going to be
too.
situations like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, compare that to North Korea. Like Kim Jong-il does like has like they haven't directly aggressed. I mean, they've had like small incursions and things against South Korea, but he maintains control of his populace by doing these things so that they don't attack him. So
Yeah.
that could be a big part of why, if you push your army outwards, they can't then turn inwards and attack you.
Well, Kim Jong-il isn't doing
Right.
anything because he's dead.
I'm sorry, Kim Jong-un. Wrong. Wrong one. Sorry, messing up my Korean history. Yeah. Um But I think you
But
think
that's the
about
cool thing about far future too, is you can eliminate that gap in knowledge by kind of comparing or using real world scenarios
Right.
to help illustrate your point, and not in that you're gonna write, oh, it's like North Korea, but if you write it in such a way where the reader is living in modern day can make that connection. Oh yeah, this is like that. Then the leap to sympathizing or identifying with the character of the society structure isn't that big of a leap, even if it is way different. Like even if they are cyborgs or something, if you can link it somehow to something that is understandable, then that leap is not that big.
they're still going to human.
Yeah,
Right.
I have kind of a problem with cyborg characters.
I love cyborgs, man.
I like cybernetics. I don't
I
like
always think about like the point where the cybernetic arm like meets the skin. Like, does that itch? Is that like always getting like pussy?
Ugh,
Like,
gross.
In weaponized, they have a lot of like biochemical agents and like nanite
mhm.
based technology, where if they have some, like for instance, some of them have eye replacements where it's like an external thing, but a lot of that is alleviated by the nanite based kind of medicines, and even the way that the material is made, that it doesn't do that itchy stuff. But like in terms of cyborgs, like I don't I call them cybers only because I didn't want to say cyborg the whole book. But a lot of them are even in the society are different. Like you don't have like full body cybers. You have like an arm replacement here or an eye augmentation or something like that. But it's not like the Borg, right? Where they're all interconnected and yeah, they're not hive mind or anything like that. Um, but I have multiple kind of example. Like I got the cyber people who love augmentations that are artificial, and then I have the splicers who just do a lot of gene modification and that kind of thing.
The thing that gets me is about cyborgs is I feel like they're the way most people use them, I should say, is kind of a throwback technologically, to the $6 million man, that kind of thing.
Mm.
And I'm thinking like if you go far future, not even far future, I think it's going to be fairly near, that integrating cybernetics into the human body is not going to be a matter of replacement. It's going to be people who have, stuff that's there
Right. Well, we already
on
do it.
top of what you have already. It's going to be like an enhancement rather than
Mhm.
replacement.
Well, and in that way, everybody in the universe is a cybernetic person because they all have you know some type of technology in them, and a lot of even some of the the named cybers in the book, it's more for aesthetics, right? Like they're doing it for aesthetic purposes rather than just pure functional because they like that thing. Um, But sometimes people write cybers as like overpowered or cyborgs as overpowered. And I tried as much as I could to stay away from that uh, handicap because I didn't want the cybernetic characters to automatically outmatch everybody else.
Well, in Grimms of War, they have a lot of medical technology, a lot of biotech is way more advanced than ours. But not everybody can have like limbs regrown or regenerated from their DNA. Some people have to have cybernetics, and one of the main characters is Nadia. She's a spy, and she gets, well, spoiler alert for a book that's 4 years old at this point. She gets her arm chopped off or melted off in the first book, and ends up getting a cybernetic replacement that she uses very well in the following books because nobody expects her to have an arm that can do what it does. But there's always the problem, which is that the arm is anchored to her body, and so if she were trying to lift a car, it would just rip her arm off.
Right.
They actually people had brought that up as a criticism of the $6 Million Man. So when they did a movie, like a sequel movie, 15 years later or something, or 20 years later, they actually addressed that and said when Steve's son is like given the cybernetic treatment, like, yes, and we have reinforced his spine as well, just like we did with you, to make sure he could use all because all the fans have been, and critics have been saying his arm will rip right off his body, so they made sure they put that in. I thought it was funny.
Well, and that's true. A lot of uh, cyborg characters forget, or they leave out that a lot of their anatomy is still flesh and blood. So you still have laws of physics to deal with, inertia. Like you say, you could try to pick up a car and your arm's going to get ripped off.
I mean,
'cause you
physics still
have,
work, right? Because you're not as heavy as the
right.
car, so
You're not that
Right.
far in the future.
Yeah.
You have directed control of gravity that you can like
What
put
people
a
tend to
singularity in
forget-
your butt that like offsets the car. And
What
now,
people tend to forget about cyborgs is if you have cyborgs, even if they go ahead and reinforce the spine and all that stuff that can lift up a car, where is that power coming from? You're going to have like a nuclear power pack inside your
Mhm.
body to power all this stuff.
Yep.
you have that Duracell battery. I mean,
Well, and then
it,
going back to like far future stuff, like almost everything I do is far future. Even my new series I'm working on is 2500, so it's far future, and that is like power is always going to be your limiting factor, right? How much power can you generate, and how can you get it from where it's generated to where it needs to be? And that's in spaceships, that's in weapons, that's in suits, that's in everything. One of the big things we're dealing with today is just the limit of lithium-ion batteries and what we can do with the new kinds of batteries. So I was so excited about that diamond nuclear battery that turned out to be not very great. Because if someone comes up with a new kind of battery that works better, holds more, then that's going to change a lot.
And you mentioned that, and that made me remember I was doing research for my modern day thriller, and I came across a new type of battery. And where did I steal that? Because it was better than the lithium ion, and now I can't remember where I stored that note. But it was really interesting.
Well, what everybody's waiting for, and what's really going to change the world in a kind of a black swan moment, just like cell phones and miniaturized computing, is high temperature superconductors.
mm-hmm.
You get high temperature superconductors, you can build batteries that store power for a lot longer and don't lose it and don't leak it.
Right.
And room temperature superconductors will change things. Ultra capacitors will change things, but almost everything that
calcium oxygen batteries is what it was. Calcium oxygen batteries.
Oh, right on. Yeah, almost everything that will allow us to do the stuff that we want to do in our sci-fi is all going to be power related, and which is kind of why I like the far future stuff, because I could just say we have fusion reactors, and we have room temperature supercapacitors, and we have this and we have that, because that's stuff that's going to happen, and then you just sort of shape the technology and society in that direction.
I think the problem is, can we sell more iPhones if we have better batteries? Because the batteries are a great way to sell more.
No, they won't, because they'll update it, and all of a sudden the battery will suck.
Yep. And then the iOS will be all glitchy.
which is another thing to think about in your far future.
I
So
really wanted to do a subplot where the ship's software got updated and everything just sucked. But
yep. Okay, well, I think we're at an hour. So if you've got some ideas, I think we ranged all over the place because this is a fun thing to talk about, and this is where the imagination comes into play, and there's just so much you can uh, just think about. I don't know. So love to hear what you think. Let us know in the comments or in the Discord group. And if you haven't joined the Discord, there'll be a link. Come check us out over there. And yeah, we'll see you next time. So thanks for hanging out with us. Later.